Good afternoon, Matt.
Good afternoon, Rohan. Looking very smart today, wearing a jacket. I hope it's not too cold where you are.
Well, now that I've entered my 30s, Matt, I thought I'd start looking the part.
Is it really so bad? It's only been 2 weeks.
Well, I've gained a lot of wisdom so far. I'm a lot more observant than I used to be. My family set me up on a treasure hunt. Yeah, scavenger hunt. I was made to find wonders in my house which I didn't even know existed. So that was great fun.
Well, I'm glad we're having fun, even in the relative constraints of the present moment. We had a little discussion about this last week. Last week, I believe just about half of our participants either had the vaccine themselves or knew someone who had. So we're hoping to get a little tick up on that this week as a nice little bit of news at the end of the session.
That would be good.
Yeah.
My other half had a vaccine now, so I think everyone's, obviously I've got a very medical family, so they're all vaccinated. I'm the only one out. So I've been toying with the idea of going back to work as a doctor for a few weeks just to get the vaccine a bit earlier.
Yeah, well, anyway, we may as well start off. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. In a small change from our original schedule, so those of you who were with me last week will have been expecting a discussion of reapplying to Oxford and Cambridge this week. However, fewer people than we expected have had their offers so far. So we've decided to delay that until next week when people have all of the information, as there's obviously no harm in thinking about reapplying before you found out the verdict this time round. But it does make things a little less relevant. So we decided to give that an extra week. So today we're going to be talking about applying to study science, technology, engineering and maths, something I myself have never done. And next week we'll be talking about reapplying to Oxford and Cambridge. We're joined today by my boss, Rohan. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Rohan.
Absolutely, thanks, Matt. So hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Rohan Angerwell. I studied medicine at Cambridge, but actually my undergrad was actually natural sciences at Cambridge, then went on to complete my full medical degree. I worked as a doctor for a few years, and now I work full-time at UniAdmissions, managing its commercial arms, and having the pleasure of working with Matt every Saturday to kind of speak to as many parents and students to help them improve their application.
Yep, my name is Matt. I look after our research here at UniAdmissions. So my job is to make sure that everything you're about to see in the coming slides is true and is not just stuff we've made up, which is a challenging job in the world of education, where of course there are a lot of opinions about everything, but we do our very best to make sure everything that we claim is backed up by evidence. Now, a lot of the questions that we're going to look at, and the questions that you're going to give us when we get to the Q&A in about 20 minutes, will be a little too complicated and detailed for us to answer. It might mean me looking something up. It might mean Rohan asking a subject specialist. Whatever it is, chances are some of your questions will be too difficult. And in that case, the best bet for you is to get in touch with us directly by booking a consultation. That'll give you the chance to speak to my colleague Will, my colleague Dylan, other members of the team, who'll be able to give you personalised responses to any questions you might have that are slightly outside of the scope of what we can figure out while also on a call. Often people come to me with quite detailed statistical questions, and the answer simply is I can't actually get all the spreadsheets running in parallel with the Zoom call.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I have to defer them and onto a consultation.
It's difficult, isn't it? I think the common question we get asked is, what are my chances of getting in? And unfortunately, that normally requires me to ask about another 10 questions, which obviously is very difficult to do in a group setting. So yeah, please do speak with us on an individual basis.
Exactly. Yeah, you know, it will depend very much on your personal circumstances what we recommend. So please do get in touch personally, so that we can figure things out on that basis. Now, very quickly, I wanted to run through a few of our highlights of last year. Rohan can chip in and correct a few of the mistakes that I don't doubt are in these slides. where I haven't had the most up-to-date information from him. So I believe we worked with over 400 students last year at a ratio of just about 4 tutors per student, which is pretty enviable. You won't get that in a conventional school, and over 10,000 hours of study. I don't know if we've come down with an absolute definitive figure for how much studying was done in 2020, but the latest I had was just over 10,000.
Yeah, they're still taking up a few of the straggling data still coming in, but I think those numbers are pretty much within a few percent. So yeah, it was a pretty big year.
We're also particularly pleased with the number of students we worked with through our foundation. This means that students who are in receipt of free school meals, who come from areas of poor access to higher education, they're able to work with us for anything from free to greatly reduced cost. And that was 93 students last year. I hope that number's right. And we're targeting to match our students one-to-one by next year, which is terrifyingly close all of a sudden. So if we find ourselves working with, say, 500 students in 2022, that'll be 500 who are also coming to us on a reduced basis through the foundation, which is a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, I think our capacity for this year, we've worked it out to be about just under 500. So that'll be a wonderful aim to go for. If anyone is listening and you are from a socioeconomic background which you think might qualify you, then please do get in touch. We have targets to meet, and we'd love to kind of help students essentially improve their chances regardless of their financial status.
I was discussing this with Will last week, and in fact, for us, the challenge is getting people in, not figuring out whether they are eligible or not. We'd much rather that you got in touch and tried than not. Don't worry and thinking it's not for you. So those are our two sort of big highlights, which brings us on to the research I've been doing, which is in a sort of an early stage for this year as the new information comes out. But this is where I've put in the pie chart, Rohan's favorite part of the presentation.
Well, I suppose it falls on to me now. So every year we get lots of parents and students, particularly this part of the year, who are worried about something minor that's happened. So I was speaking to a parent, one of the students actually is already on our programs, Matt, and she was her daughter had been rejected as head girl, and so she was absolutely devastated. The student was really down in the dumps, and I spent about 30 minutes effectively listening to her and just purely finding out and really exploring her concerns. At the end of it, I kind of explained the summary of this, and suddenly everything seemed to make sense. So without kind of beating around the bush, the way this works is, unlike American universities, top UK university, Oxford and Cambridge, are very, very focused on purely academics. So whilst it's helpful to be an Olympic athlete or be a grandmaster in chess or have a background in drama or even a film career, all of those things are not necessary and by no means sufficient to get you a place at Oxford and Cambridge. The way Oxford and Cambridge will shortlist and the way the application selection process works is essentially it's divided into 4 parts. And this is based on a lot of information that we've kind of collated over the years. And Matt can obviously go into that a little bit more detail, but for most courses in universities, the way it works is 30% of your application score overall is determined by your exam grades, which essentially means for the vast majority of applicants is your GCSEs that you've achieved. The next 30% is your admissions test score. So for instance, if you're applying to engineering, you may have to set the PAT test or the ENGA. And then the other 30% is the interview score. Now, for those of you astute amongst us, you will notice that adds up to 90%. As where's the other 10%? Well, that's pretty much not really a cop-out, but it's kind of a way of saying everything else counts for the other 10%. So the notable things in there are the personal statement, are the school reference, is any extracurriculars that you may have mentioned. These percentages do move around. So for instance, if you're applying for engineering and keys, your admissions test scores makes a much greater proportion of your application than other colleges, but this is generally a pretty good approximation. The reason this is so important is we get students coming to us who are obsessed about improving their personal statement, about talking about the 15 books that they've read, and worrying that they haven't got enough work experience, particularly for STEM. The three major things that you need to focus on are your exam grades, admissions tests, interviews. Now, if you are in year 11 right now, and you get your GCSEs, and I actually see this quite a lot, Matt, we sometimes get students coming to us who've almost got full A stars, but they've screwed up. You know, it tends to be a language who they're not very good at, or maybe even English lit, and they've got a B or a C in it, and they've got pretty much straight A stars. Please be aware that you have the option of rejecting that grade in order to keep up that percentage of A stars high, and that becomes increasingly more important if you're applying to Oxford, for instance, instead of Cambridge. But again, before we kind of advise that, it's best you speak to us. But this hopefully gives you a better understanding of why and how Oxford and Cambridge really place importance on each component of the application process. So if you haven't been made head girl, if you haven't been given that grade 8 piano, please don't worry. And the only thing really that will matter is the test, interview, and your GCSEs.
Thanks, Rohan. Yeah. Now we're going to be, we're going to be focusing on STEM here. But I believe next week we're talking about reapplicants. We'll be coming back around to talk about economics and PPE, medicine, law, humanities, all of those other subjects as well. So if you haven't fully settled on what you're going to study, or if you're joining us despite it being, like me, pretty hopeless at science, we'll be coming to those subjects again, sort of in due course. So on the subject of choosing a subject, there are a few things to bear in mind when you're thinking about STEM. The first thing to bear in mind is that a lot of degrees in STEM are based on things that you won't have studied at school. If you want to go and study aeronautical engineering, for example, that simply isn't taught in schools. You can't do an A-level in aeronautical engineering. I don't believe there's a biochemistry A-level. There isn't a biomedical science A-level. There are a lot of subjects that are going to be new to you as you get to university. And so making sure that you've picked the right one is really worthwhile. Also, competition for places varies a lot between these courses. And so you can also take the opportunity to make a strategic choice. For example, 34% of students who apply to Oxford to study chemistry get in, but less than half that for biochemistry. Now, if you go and look at the syllabus, you can do quite a lot of biochemistry on the chemistry course if you want. And so quite why the delta there is so big, I've never fully understood. But it's really worth making sure that you understand the nuances of a subject if you're applying for something that you've not studied at A-level. Obviously, if you've studied biology at A-level and you want to do more biology, absolutely fine. But if you're going into something that's a little bit more subtle, then it really helps to know why you've chosen that and to make sure that it's a positive choice rather than you just defaulting into something when there might be another subject that you could make a more competitive application for.
Yeah.
The other thing to bear in mind here is that for STEM subjects, it's generally a bad idea to have a gap year. This is particularly true for maths. The reason being that you can forget an unbelievable amount of maths in a year. This isn't such a problem for students applying for humanities degrees, but generally speaking, the advice is that a gap year isn't a great idea if you're applying for the sciences. Obviously, if you've got a year set up working the lab, brilliant, go and do that. But if your plan is to go and backpack around Peru, obviously that's forbidden at the moment. But in the sciences, the impact on your kind of knowledge base tends to be much greater in terms of the damage done by taking a gap year than you might find for other subjects. So that all taken into account, how do you get in to study one of these subjects? Now, the personal statement, Rohan mentioned this a moment ago, it's simply not as important for the science as it would be for English or history. If you're applying to study maths, ultimately they care if you're good at maths, not if you're good at English. And since the personal statement is an essay writing exercise, there's going to be less weight put on that because it isn't what you're applying to do. For a lot of students, the personal statement may in fact be the last essay they end up writing. This means that there's a lot more weight put onto the admissions tests. So you really want to be focusing your efforts there rather than worrying, like Rohan said, about adding that extra book to your personal statement. Now, tests-wise, one thing to remember is that although there is a test at Cambridge called the Cambridge Test of Mathematics, confusingly, you don't have to sit it to get into Cambridge Maths anymore. They're now getting everyone to do STEP afterwards, as part of the admissions process rather than doing a test beforehand. So that's a nuance with Cambridge, which means that the GCSE grades are relatively important there in terms of your application.
Yeah, and just on that note, actually, maths at Cambridge is probably one of the big exceptions to the kind of most of the rules we talk about, because most subjects at Oxford, they'll only make an X number of offers and they expect pretty much everyone who gets an offer to accept it. Whereas in Cambridge maths, what they do is they make a lot of offers, far more than they have spaces for. And then the criteria for you getting a place is actually performing and passing the test rather than the other way around. So what that means is there's actually it's not particularly competitive to get an offer for maths at Cambridge, but actually to get accepted is very, very difficult. So it's almost the flip side. I think it's pretty much the only course that has an admissions test after the interview itself.
Yeah, I can't think of another example. It's an interesting interesting wrinkle. I believe we have a Cambridge mathematician, Rhiannon, joining us. Unless she went to Oxford, I can't remember off the top of my head. Joining us in a few minutes, so she'll be able to fill us in on the process from the inside as well. Now, speaking of the admissions test, the reason that they are so much more important is, of course, it's much easier to test whether you're good at maths with a maths test than it might be for other subjects. It's hard to, you can't put the law students on trial, for example, to test if they're good lawyers. And this is really borne out through the research we've done and the data when you come to look at it. So to give you an example, here is the distribution of test scores for physics at Oxford. And as you can see, what you've got there are three lovely smooth curves, each of them nestling inside of each other, and the candidates who are placed, which is to say who get in, well, you can see the correlation between getting a good score and getting a place, and the correlation between getting a good score and getting an interview. It's lovely and clear.
Interesting. Someone who got almost zero seemed to get shortlisted. That's impressive.
That will occasionally happen. There must have been something really interesting in that person's statement, I guess. That, or they did the test badly, but in a really interesting way.
Yeah, it must be quite hard to get zero in a multiple choice, actually, thinking back to it.
Yeah, I mean, that is, it. In some respects, it's almost mathematically identical to getting 100%, as you shouldn't be able to, very, very difficult to pull that off. So, sorry. So this is for the Oxford physics test, which I believe is also the test for engineering at Oxford. The data for Cambridge, they unfortunately don't release it in as nice a format, but you can see here an absolute cavalcade of graphs from the Cambridge Natural Sciences test, giving you a sense of the distribution of scores. People clustering over at the left, where your performance is essentially the same as random, and then tailing off down to the right as scores go up. The tidiest example of this, because I don't want to bore everyone with 30 graphs, is the Oxford Maths exam. So if you want to study maths at Oxford, they make you do a maths test. And as you can see, how you do on the maths test is unbelievably clearly correlated with whether you get in or not. If you're in the very top set, the top, by the looks of it, 10 or 15 students, your chance of getting in go up to 80 or 90%. If you're at the bottom, not even a chance of an interview. And there's a very small number of students who sneak in despite doing poorly at the test, at the very bottom of each of those bars in the middle of the distribution, as you can see. This is why we put such an emphasis on the admissions test when it comes to STEM, because the relationship between doing well on the test and getting the place is so much stronger for these than it might be for other subjects. So you've done the test, you've done marvelously in the test, and you've managed to get an interview. What's going to happen when you get to the interview? Now, the STEM interviews tend to be a little different from the law or humanities type of interviews, in that they're going to be much more of a problem-based interview. There'll be graph and data interpretation questions. What they're going to want to see is to see how you work these problems out loud, so that you can show you're working in a clear, coherent way to people in front of you. You already demonstrated that you can do the work quietly on your own on a piece of paper. They want to show that you can communicate it to other subject experts and make yourself understood, not just in front of MATLAB or Python. Also, some of the questions may be a little bit weird in the STEM interviews. This will be because they're trying to push you in the direction of unfamiliar problems, because, you know, giving you a lot of difficult simultaneous equations to solve. Obviously, you might be able to do that, but they also want to see the kind of creativity and flexibility of your mind, which is harder to test in a multiple choice quiz. So these are real questions drawn from our book, The Ultimate Oxbridge Interview Guide, that have been asked at Oxford and Cambridge over the past few years. I've drawn one from each of the kind of big STEM categories. So in a biology interview, we had a student who was asked, why do cats live longer than dogs? I don't know why, but apparently this is true. Cats live around 3 years longer than dogs. One chemistry student was asked, what would you change about the periodic table? Make it differently shaped, I guess. Put it in alphabetical order. I don't know how I would change it. Students for engineering were asked how aeroplanes work. I've got a rough idea of how aeroplanes work. My cousin, who is a helicopter pilot, he claims he doesn't understand how helicopters work. So that would be, I guess that's the question you get if you're applying for a master's degree. And one math student.
Simple, the planes working. I mean, I don't want to bore people with it, but people think it's just because the weight of the plane is exceeded by the lift generated, but that was kind of disproved because planes can fly upside down, which is actually what happened to one of my friends in his interview, because he had a very similar question to this.
Yes, and this drawn from a friend of mine who was interviewed for Cambridge Maths. Must be nearly 15 years ago when we were both at school, and he was asked in his interview which was his favourite number. I can't remember which number he came back with. I'm not sure what my favourite number would be. I suppose the clever answer is something like pi, but then you have to explain it. So maybe you would want to go for an easier number like 2.
Surely yours would be 42, Matt.
Oh, that'd be a good choice, but then explaining it would be a real challenge, which I suppose is the thing there.
Especially if no one read that book.
Yes. So how can we help with the application? So I'm going to hand over to Rohan for a few slides, and he's going to give you a sense of the support we're able to offer.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So the first thing is lots of students come to us and ask, actually, can we have targeted help for the MAT or the PAT or the ENGA and so on? And obviously the answer is yes, but it really depends, because what we don't do is we don't do short day interventions. Actually, 4 or 5 years ago, we used to do ENGA courses and PAT courses and so on, but actually they just weren't that effective. What would happen is often students would attend them, they would feel good for a few days, they'd go home, they'd think maybe I don't need to work as hard because it was a really good course, and then the performance on the day wouldn't be as good. So essentially what we'd like to do is we like to work with students for a protracted period of time, at least 6 to 12 months realistically. And that essentially allows us to have a much better success rate with our students. So what we're not really interested in how well you do on the test or your interview, we're interested in whether you get the place or not. And essentially what that means is we look after you from the start of your application to the finish. So it's not just a short targeted intervention, it's something that shown to work, you get repeated weekly exposure in teaching. Obviously, so the way I like to explain is we're not really a course provider or a tutoring provider. We're kind of more of we're effectively an Oxbridge preparation school. So it's effectively taking like a 5th A level or a 6th A level, depending on how many you're doing. And what we do is we have a structured curriculum that you work through on a week-by-week basis. We'll say in January you should be doing these 5 or 6 things, in February you should be doing these things, and so on. So Matt's helpfully put up a few slides. Thanks, Matt. So we've got the Cambridge Natural Sciences program on display here. And the things I'd really like to point out is we do ask for a fair amount of commitment from the student, and you'll probably ask, well, why can't I just sign up on the website? It's because we're very protective of our success rates. So you'll see here, for instance, we got 3/4 of our students in the 2019 cycle. That doesn't happen by chance, that doesn't happen by luck. It happens because of a lot of hard work that we put in, but also the students. And what we don't want to do is just to accept any random student on who's not going to be motivated and committed. And then what happens is our success rates drop. So our company aims out to get 100% success rate in the long term. And every year we're moving closer and closer to that. And you may think, actually, my school can probably do a good job, and I'm sure they can. But actually, if you compare the average Oxford success rate for the top 50 schools in the UK. This includes private schools, the likes of Eton, Harrow, Winchester, Merchant Taylors, and so on. They're all averaged out to about 26%. So what we do does work, but it is a significant commitment in the way we kind of do things. So if I take the Cambridge Natural Sciences program as an example, we're looking for about 200 hours of commitment from the student. So it's about 4 hours a week. Obviously, it peaks and troughs. So over the summer and in September, October, we'd expect a lot more than the first few months this year. It's a really strange year because of the virus and what's going on, but it still means that because students are studying from home, they do have a lot more time to kind of really commit to this. The way the program, I don't know if you've got another slide, Matt, showing the structure of the program. Yeah, thanks. So the way it works is there are 4 major components. The first major component is one-to-one teaching. So typically students on the programs will have about 30 hours of one-to-one teaching. They'll typically be with someone who's an expert in their subject. So be with someone who, such as, if for instance, if you're applying for biological natural sciences, you'll have a biological natural sciences tutor, as an example, working with you. And at the end of that, you'll also have 4 mock interviews, all delivered by different tutors. And that essentially allows them to get a better understanding and simulate the mock interviews like they actually will happen. What we don't want to do is to make people a little bit too comfortable. And it sounds a little bit mean because they're 17, 18-year-old, they've never gone through the interview process before. But actually that's really important, because sometimes what we find is students have mock interviews with their school teachers or parents who they're very comfortable with and don't get pushed. Actually, when they end up in their real interview, it can come as quite a shock. So the first component is the individual teaching. The second component is resources. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our resources that are coming up. But essentially, we provide a lot of textbooks, materials, online videos. We've got our own practice platforms. Essentially, it's pretty much limitless in terms of how much work you can be doing. The third thing, and these are things I'm quite keen on, are the enrichment seminars. These are on every Sunday. Our next ones, thanks, Matt. The next seminar is actually tomorrow at 2 o'clock. They run every 2 o'clock on a Sunday. And essentially what you get is university level topics are taught. So for instance, for engineering, we've covered topics like the construction of megastructures, the ethics of self-driving cars. On the biology side, we'll cover things like the structure of hemoglobin. So these are things that you'll get taught at an advanced level at a university, and they're delivered by Oxbridge tutors who specialize in their field. What this allows you to do is obviously build a great deal of breadth into your subject. And essentially when you get to your interview, imagine talking to an interviewer and they said, what have you read recently? Which is actually a really common question. Well, you've got a huge array, a huge library of topics that you can draw upon. Obviously, some topics are more interesting than others. We kind of record all of these anyway, so you kind of can go back to them. But what it allows you to do is really build depth so that when someone talks to you in your interviews, you can really show off them. So I remember one instance of this when I went to my Cambridge interview, and I'd had a lot of lectures on statins, and they asked me how the statins worked, and I looked them straight in the eye and said, Mr. Interviewer, they inhibit 3-hydroxy 3-methylglutaralkyl coenzyme A reductase inhibitors. I think he was surprised, as you can expect. He was a bit shocked, but I think he was pretty impressed at that point. And that level of depth was really important to kind of my overall interview success. So those are the third component, and the fourth and final component is we do have one-day courses. So if you're applying for engineering, you'll have an ENGA course, you'll have a personal statement course, an interview course. There's about 4 courses in total take place over the year. And throughout this, essentially the program has been designed so that every component interacts with each other. And because of that, essentially it's an all-encompassing curriculum. So unfortunately, we don't take students on just for single bits. We like to work with them right from the start and pass them back to their parents with an offer. That's kind of what our company ethos is all about. So sometimes people say, can I have an hour of tutoring? The answer is no. Please just don't waste our time or yours by trying to contact us about that. We only work with people who are really, really serious and keen about their application. Now, there is a chance you may contact us and based on our consultation, we may say, actually, we don't think you need our help, but we'll still leave you with some piece of advice. That does happen, yeah, on the odd occasion as well. Hopefully that gives you a better flavor of things. I'm gonna shut up now because I think Matt's got a few more slides that he wants to get through.
Thanks, Rohan. One thing Rohan failed to mention, even though he insisted I put an extra slide in about it, is the preparation portal we have.
Yes.
So we spoke earlier about the importance of admissions tests, particularly for STEM subjects. And this is a new tool that we've developed over the last year or so. And that's going to play an extremely long video. So I'm going to jump around because I forgot to edit this. But this will give you a sense of the kinds of things this platform does. So the idea is that in order to prepare for these tests, you not only practice them by simulating the test in a using past papers, but also you have access to practice questions and revision notes that help you to fully understand everything you need to know for these tests. Now, so hopefully if I press play, I'll be able to get it to sort of jump about. We have a look. You can see there where you can pick from different areas and read up on how to do particular kinds of math. Here's a kind of maths I don't understand, and here's how you do it. So this would be useful for me.
Yeah, so this is really like called world leading, and I was quite keen on developing this. This was actually meant to launch in 2021, but we kind of brought the launch forward in 2020 to help our cohort because they were doing a lot of online learning. There's nothing like this out there. We're pretty much the only company who even has the resources to develop this, and it's every month it seems to improve. There's more and more questions and materials on there. I think we had tens of thousands of questions that were completed on it. So, it clearly works. Students really found it useful. So this is our revised bank. So you can take lots and lots of practice questions. It tells you which one you've got correct, which one you've got false. You can mark your own solutions. And if you're not sure how exactly it was work, you can click the show solutions bit at the top. And it keeps a record of all your previous scores. So you can see, for instance, which sessions you were particularly good at. And then the final bit is a simulate section. So you can actually take previous past papers under timed conditions. Now, we're not sure exactly how the admissions tests are going to be administered this year. But for instance, a couple of the tests last year were done online. Well, if that does happen, then obviously this is perfect practice. But even if it isn't, then it still allows you to keep a record of all your scores. And then we're looking to add extra functionality to it later on this year. So I'm very proud of the team and for kind of being able to churn this out very, very quickly into a higher level.
Thanks, Rohan. I'm glad I put that slide in now. So all of this comes together to create the impact that we're able to have on our students. Because the good news is all of this effort, it does more or less work. Students who worked with us, these are our figures from 2019. We should have the 2020 figures sometime in the next couple of months, once I've finished phoning everyone. We had, in the 2019 season, 63% of the students who worked with us who applied to Oxbridge were able to get offers. That compares very favorably with the 18% of people who didn't work with us. And it's something we're really proud of. As Rohan said earlier, this is why we're so selective when it comes to choosing which students we work with each year, because that 63% is something that we really value and is something that we work hard to protect. So please, if you do decide to come and work with us, make sure that you're putting the hours in, as it'd be a bit embarrassing if we suddenly fell off to 57 or something. I say famous last words. I haven't done the numbers for this year yet. Hopefully things will have remained steady or gone up. People also say lovely things about us on Trustpilot. They especially say nice things about Rohan himself and Mia. Normally I would do this presentation with my colleague Will. This would be the point at which I point out that no one has ever said anything nice about Will on Trustpilot. If you've had a conversation with Will, if you've come to one of these previously and felt sympathy for him, do leave us a nice review. You can mention that Will is all right if you like. You could even say something nice about me. But if you're interested in what our customers have had to say about the experience, then Trustpilot is the place to look. And that brings us on to our Q&A section. So during the Q&A, I'm going to leave running this GIF, which has a tendency to stop midway through running, which is annoying and I haven't figured out how to fix, which will show you how to book a consultation with us. So if you have questions that we're unable to answer in the Q&A, if you want to know more, if you want to book a program, the thing to do is to get in touch by booking a consultation with us, which will allow us to answer any questions you have, set up a program if you've already decided that's a choice for you, anything along those lines. So this should loop through every 30 seconds or so and give you a lovely, clear illustration of what to do. It's fairly straightforward once you're on the website anyway, but this is a level of patronizing detail that certainly I appreciate as someone who is very forgetful. So they say that brings us into the question section. So we're joined today by Rhiannon, who I'm hoping I'm going to be able to unmute, or maybe she'll unmute herself even, and she will introduce herself. Let's hope so. Here she is.
Can you hear and see me all right? Sorry, I can't see you.
I can hear and see you.
Great. So hi, I'm Rhiannon. I've just finished doing my 3 years of studying maths at Oxford. I'm currently doing a master's now, so I applied in, I entered it in 2017, doing all the applications in 2016 and 17.
Fab. So Rhiannon's here to answer any questions we might have specifically about the experience of applying for and studying STEM, because I haven't done it. And I thought, although Rohan has sort of done it in his medical studies, neither of us have done it for a while because we're old, whereas Rhiannon is young and fresh and has recent experiences to draw upon, unlike us. What I'll do is I will present you with some questions, both of you, and you can answer them. So let's see what we've got. KJ asks, in the instance where GCSE grades aren't sufficient to be a competitive applicant, but your A-level grades are in line with the offer, how does that affect your chance of admission? I think this is a good one for you, Rohan. If you haven't got the world's best GCSEs, what should you do?
Yeah, so the key words there are the sufficient to be competitive, and I think it's worth just kind of picking that apart. So the average, of course, it depends on the average student and the subject that you're applying to, but the average applicant will have around 6 A stars at GCSE, A stars defined as an 8 or a 9. The average accepted applicant, again, there's lots of exceptions to this, generally tend to have at least 7 or 8. Now, if you have less than those, then it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a chance of getting in. If you have more than those, then again, it doesn't guarantee a success. What's more important is the fact that you're kind of able to demonstrate consistent academic progress. So just because you did particularly badly in GCSEs, but you went to a particularly bad school, that doesn't preclude you from putting a winning application in. An A level that is below what we would be expecting. So for instance, if you were only on track for an AAB, then yes, it'd be very difficult for you to get a place. Most offers will be based at least minimum 3 A's. Generally, science is a 1 A star and 2 A's at Oxford and 2 A stars and 1 A at Cambridge. So yes, in general, if you have bad GCSEs, depend one on how bad they are, but two, more importantly, is what the tests and the interview end up doing.
Fab. Thanks, Rohan. It hasn't come up yet, but I don't want to leave Rhiannon out entirely. We talked a little bit earlier about the experience of the sciences interview. How was yours, Rhiannon? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so mine were obviously in person because it's before Corona. So I went, I had 2 interviews at the college I'd applied for, and I had 2 interviews, one at different colleges, because they always they pull people around at different colleges to make sure everyone gets a chance, kind of, because some more people apply to each college each year. They kind of spread everyone out. I only got asked one thing on my personal statement when I was there, so that kind of holds the same about they don't tend to ask about personal statements in STEM. I think because everyone's kind of personal statement says the same sort of thing of, I've read some books, I've been to some lectures, I've done quite well in kind of national maths challenges. So that sort of a thing, everyone says the same. They do ask more kind of sciencey questions. I got one question which was just checking something I said I could prove, and that took about 10 seconds. Then the rest of it was just kind of new questions. So my most memorable question that I got asked is kind of, so I got asked how many edges would a 4-dimensional cube have? Which is obviously a question that you see and you panic a bit. And I think the thing that mock interviews really help you with is you just need to not panic at these new situations, because no one hears that question and immediately knows the answer. No one, I think it's 32 in the end. No one knows the answer of that. So with the mock interviews, it kind of gets you more of a chance of, you don't just kind of look wide-eyed at it. You just have to kind of start talking through all the things that you do know, and then working out how you can put those together into something of how many edges a 4D cube would have. So that's what the interview questions, they're always weird, they're a bit strange, but it's just about taking the knowledge that you have, and that can only be a certain level, like with the admissions tests. you're only like it's the A-level syllabus or even half of that because most people won't have studied it by then. And then the ways that you can mix that up to approach new situations. So kind of things of, I know how many edges a 3D cube has, how do I go through different dimensions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really important, Rihanna. I think, sometimes when parents and students read some particularly challenging questions in the Times or the Guardian, they can kind of freak out and think that they need to prepare all of those, where it sounds like your experiences were quite similar to mine, where you were given a challenging problem, but then they perhaps helped you with and gave you time and then helped you along making each assumption. Kind of, it was very much the journey, not the destination they were after.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think it was the best way it was said to me was they do interviews like they do because they try and structure it like a tutorial or a supervision. They want to see kind of how easy you are to teach as a student. And so the thing is, and if you're a good person to teach, when given kind of a new situation that you don't know things about, kind of how you approach that with the knowledge that you already have. It isn't about kind of immediately knowing how to do the new thing, but how to put together the things that you already know. It's about kind of listening to the interviewer, because and I'm a tutor as well, I didn't say that earlier. So when I do mock interviews, you can tell when some people, you try and give them a bit of a hint and they completely ignore you and just kind of keep going down the path they're going on. And that doesn't make you really a very easy to teach student. So it's just about getting the hang of how to do it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. In my my medical interview, they found out that I'd studied A-level physics. So they, in my medical interview, I got asked, how would you weigh the Earth? It was actually, they said, what's the weight of the Earth? And I said, well, I wasn't sure, but I tried to work it out. But there was another student who actually just happened to know the weight of the Earth and said it to them. And then they said, prove it, which then, of course, led them down the same path of trying to work it out. But so they're not really not interested in the kind of knowledge-based things. It's more about the application of knowledge.
See,
Yeah,
my immediate reaction there was, how would you weigh the Earth? And my answer was carefully. Wouldn't want to break it. So we've got a couple of easy questions here that I'm going to go through quickly to give these two a break. Samira Bera asks, for Oxford Medicine, how many students are taken from outside the UK? Is it a fixed number? It is a fixed number, unfortunately. This is set, I believe, by the BMA. Maybe it's a different body. BMs, there we are. It is set by the people who are in charge of medicine in the UK. And this is because the UK needs doctors. And they can't have other people from all over coming and taking up the places that they need to train British doctors. Unfortunately, this means that at Oxford next year, there are going to be, I think, 14 places, which is not very many. So as you can imagine, these places are unbelievably competitive.
Yeah, it tends to hover around 10% for most medical schools. It's a max.
Yeah, this is unfortunate. We would much prefer them to take more international applicants, but unfortunately, this is a decision that comes right down from the top. Well, this shouldn't let you put you off applying, of course, but just to be aware that it is even more competitive if you're coming from outside the UK, or indeed the, I guess now from inside the EU as well, actually, to study medicine. It's a really competitive process. But on the bright side, if you get in, you can be particularly proud of yourself. Amaya asks, following with the new system with GCSE, with both 8 and a 9 being an A-star, change the GCSE requirements. Are they expecting all 9s instead of all 8s? Now, my understanding is that they're not fussed about the difference between an 8 and a 9 at the moment. Have you heard differently, either of you? Particularly relevant for you, perhaps, Rhiannon, because you're younger and know young people who might have actually experienced these new GCSEs.
I don't think the people who've just done the new GCSEs have just started going in. I think this was maybe the first or second year of it, so they were quite iffy on it all to start with because they didn't really know what the new system meant. I think they'll have more guidance on the website, but I think you're right in that they don't mind too much between 8s and 9s, because a 9 is technically an A-star, I think.
A-star. They hadn't invented the A-star when I did my GCSE, so I don't have any A-stars.
That was my excuse for when I took my A-levels as well.
Fab. Marina asks, although the extracurricular section of the application is the smallest, what kind of things do you recommend doing extra in order to improve your application? This is a good one for you, Rhiannon. What did you add beyond that you had read some books about maths? Had you done anything? Did you get away with doing nothing?
Well, so I got it explained to me as you can have extracurriculars and you can have supercurriculars. And so supercurriculars are things relating to the subject. So that's kind of going to lectures, reading books. So I found like 2 popular science type maths books. If you go to the popular section of kind of the library or the bookshop, they have kind of a good selection. And I read those and kind of put in a bit that I enjoyed from the chapter. And then I kind of said, I enjoyed this particular bit. So I went and looked into it a bit more. And then I learned this / was interested by that. And then I also went to, so near me, there were some kind of free, again, popular science type lectures. I went to some physics ones. I put that in as well. You don't need to just say about the exact subject that you're going for, because I was saying I like the physicsy side of maths. And so obviously with Corona, that's a bit more difficult, but I'm sure that there are lots of kind of free lectures online or kind of TED Talks that you can go to. So they're looking for just kind of independent interest that you've taken in the subject to look at something new. And so it's just going to those, listening, thinking about what you're interested in and what you're not. And then kind of putting that down. I just want to know your thoughts on it. And so then there's also there's the kind of classics of if there's school maths challenge or school science challenge, we've done well in that, put that in there. And then kind of just a paragraph at the end really of I like playing football, I've done a musical instrument, I've helped out at Scouts, that kind of a thing.
Fab, thanks. Very helpful to know. Yeah, as Rhiannon said, the thing to focus on are these supercurriculars rather than the extracurricular. You know, if you want to go off and be a mathematician, it isn't really that important whether you've done your gold or silver Duke of Edinburgh, but that you've actually demonstrated that you're interested in maths does make a real difference. This again is a difference from the US system, where there is a much greater expectation that you be, you know, raising money for charity or doing this or sporting that. And at Oxford and Cambridge, they honestly don't care. Like, it's nice that you like rugby, but you're not applying to study rugby, so not important. Now, let's go back to the questions. Ufwoma asks, how important are GCSE results when applying to Cambridge for medicine? This is an experience you have had firsthand, Rohan.
Yeah, we always get medicine. Do we always get medicine questions
Even when I tell them not to come, the medics, they're always coming out. Well, I think also a lot of people will be on the fence as to whether they want to study biochemistry or medicine or biological sciences or medicine.
Yeah, sure.
So there's a certain amount of crossover there. You get many fewer people who are deciding between English and medicine at this point.
Yeah, medics tend to be quite keen in general. So the short answer is GCSEs are very important, both for Oxford and Cambridge. They are far more important for Oxford. Again, the average medical applicant has 6 to 8 stars, 6 to 7 A stars at GCSE. The average successful applicant has 8 to 9 A stars at GCSE. Again, having gone there and studied it myself, I had friends who had straight A stars, and I knew people who had straight A stars who were rejected. And I also had friends who got in with 4 A stars. So they are, again, by no means necessary nor sufficient on their own. It's very much a holistic application for Cambridge.
Fab. Thanks, Rohan. There are a couple of questions from Maria Brahman, Brahman? You'll have to let me know in the consultation, have come in through the chat. She asks, do we have much experience preparing students specifically to study veterinary medicine? Do we have any vets with us this year, Rohan? I can't remember. I suppose I haven't had the chance to meet any of the students because of the virus. Normally I would be able to remember.
So 2021 we don't yet, but 2020 we had a handful that we worked with. I think a couple of them already have offers from other universities. Cambridge obviously haven't sent their offers out yet. But yeah, we have a vet sciences program which we work with. Tends to be for people applying for Cambridge more than other places because they want help with the NSAA, for example.
Fab, thank you. Yeah, Maria has also asked a little bit of clarification on the question of sport. So what we meant on the question of sport is you're not going to get in on the basis that you're a fantastic squash player or fencer. So this isn't like the Ivy League colleges in the States where you can get in on the basis of an athletic scholarship. Or where your sporting prowess, your silver medal at the Olympics will be taken into account as something as part of your application as a point in favour of you. In the UK system, they care whether you're interested in the subject, and that's it. You're welcome to fill your personal statement with examples of how good you are at tennis, but ultimately that isn't going to be how they decide whether or not to take you. Maria asks about rowing. Rowing is very much something that you can get into once you are there, and it's fun. I didn't like it, but I don't like the cold. But you're not going to get in on the basis that you are going to try out rowing. So it's important, I think, to make that distinction between the application process and kind of the experience once you're there. Once you're in, you can do as much rowing as you want, and some people do, in effect, do a degree in rowing. But you don't need to. It needn't form part of your application because it isn't going to form part of the decision. Did either of you row? You don't look like a rower, if I'm honest, Rohan. Whereas Rhiannon, I've only ever seen your head, so I don't know if you row beneath that.
Yeah, I was vice president of the boat club for 2 years, so I was quite into the rowing. Yeah, with the sports, it's good. It's good to have at the end to kind of show that you're a well-rounded person who kind of does leave the house and interact with things, but they won't accept you on that. And to be honest, tutors will. I was discouraged several times from rowing because a tutor would ideally like you to be doing as much problem sheets, as much work as you can be. And if they think you're they're not going to tell you to stop. If your grades are fine and everything, but the tutors aren't that keen on you doing loads and loads of extracurriculars if you aren't then spending time on lectures and things. So they won't ever admit you on sports, really.
Yeah, there is a surprising tension between the rowing and the academia. They're not. It's not necessarily the dynamic you would expect. You get some people, some tutors and professors who like rowing, and some who are surprisingly hostile to it.
Yeah, they just lose a lot of students to it who turn up very, very tired after doing it all morning. But it is a really good thing to get involved in when you're there. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's definitely something I would recommend trying, even if you don't stick with it. Rohan, did you try rowing?
I did actually. I did it for a couple of terms, but I think it was just very, very, very early morning. I think we were asked to wake up at 4 a.m. and I was in the middle of winter was a bit too far for me. So
yes, that was what put me off as well.
But I was very awake during my morning lectures as a result. So.
Yeah. I'm going to take one final question from Maria, and then I'm going to come back to some broader ones. She also asks, and this sort of leads into a question about colleges actually, as to whether there are colleges that are more or less friendly towards US students. So there are Americans everywhere in Cambridge, Cambridge particularly, even more so than Oxford, particularly at the postgraduate level. When I was at Cambridge, it felt like half of the people who were in my college studying for postgrad qualifications were Americans. I was at Emmanuel, and Emmanuel has a particularly strong link with the States, as Harvard was founded by John Harvard, an Emmanuel man. And so there are really strong connections there with the States. I think a couple of other colleges. I don't know if Keyes is particularly closely associated with America, but I know that Johns and Trinity, there are some really strong exchange programs that exist. And so those are colleges that are, I guess, more friendly than average towards Americans. But there are a surprising number of Americans once you get to Oxford or Cambridge, and so it's pretty friendly all round. Did you meet many Americans, Rhiannon?
Yeah, some, not loads to be honest. My college wasn't particularly known for it either. More American postgrads, a lot of them come there, and also so with the question that was asked about Americans in the boat, I think it can be a bit of a thing that with the master's students, that's when they tend to get in kind of Olympic level type rowers, and they maybe get them in on a bit of an easier master's to then who spend all of their time rowing for the uni, but undergraduate, that's not involved in it at all.
I can't believe you'd say that about a master's degree in land economy, Rhiannon.
Yeah, the boat race tends to be full of people who are in land ec, from what I understand.
But I do have a friend in the year below who he nearly got into the first boat, but then the pandemic happened, but he was going to be in it. So you don't just have to be on a master's to get into it. You can do it from undergrad if you work very hard.
Yeah. But Maria, this is a really good example of when it's helpful to get in touch with us directly through the consultation, as I feel like your circumstances are pretty specific. And so it'll be good to explore those in more detail directly. So coming back to the broader set of questions, Aziz asks, how do you go about choosing colleges? So how did you choose your college, Rhiannon? Did you just pick one off a list entirely at random? Did you go and have a look? What process did you go through?
So I found you can find kind of things online that sum them all up a lot. I kind of decided that so colleges have different sizes. So they can be between kind of 40 people and kind of 120. And I decided and that's in a year. And so I decided I wanted to go to a bigger one so I could kind of meet more people. I wanted one, so you can also, some of them you can live in for your entire degree. So you can live on college grounds, they'll support you through that. Some of them you'll have to move out to kind of a house somewhere in Oxford in second or third year. And so I thought I wanted to kind of live in and not have the hassle of living elsewhere. And then some of them are better at sports, some of them are really big on rowing. Some of them are kind of bigger state school ones. Some of them are kind of the big grand ones, lots of people tend to apply for. So I ended up applying for Balliol, which is quite big, and I heard it had good food and I could live in all the time. In the end, the colleges you apply for, it doesn't matter that much because I didn't end up getting in there. I got into St Hugh's, which turned out to be a big one that had good food and lots of lovely people, and I could live in for the 4 years. So everyone I know is happy at the college they end up at. Another friend I know, so she reapplied. And so she got all the kind of 28 colleges, made a big list of their acceptance rates for her subject, and literally just applied to the one that took the most people, that had the kind of the best success rate. And so those will be the ones that are a bit smaller, a bit newer, because everyone applies to the older kind of grander colleges, but they do try and spread this all out with their kind of pooling system and of giving everyone interviews at different colleges than the one you just applied for. So it does matter a bit, but everyone likes where they end up. You can try kind of pick some criteria that you might like about, but they're all pretty similar. You do get the Oxford experience at all of them. Sorry, Oxford or Cambridge.
Yes, as Rhiannon said, everyone goes to a different college, and yet you very rarely find anyone who's upset with theirs. In that respect, they're kind of like football teams. Everyone's convinced that theirs is the best, which can't possibly be true because everyone says that about their own, but no one seems to be particularly unhappy. So it's really one of those things that's a kind of a personal choice. If you can, go and have a look. We obviously do recommend going and having a look around, making a visit in person to the colleges, but if that's not possible, as Rhiannon says, the colleges themselves provide really good resources online. And I also wrote a book about this, which I can't remember if Rhiannon contributed to or not, where we collated together the experiences of students from every college at Oxford and Cambridge, and put them together so that you could read about what it was like from the inside. So you can find out which ones have the cheapest bars, which ones have the best food, which ones have the nicest laundry facilities, things that you might not necessarily expect to find on the college's official website. Certainly, they don't tend to tell you how much beer costs on the homepage of the college website. That's something you have to go and do a little bit more digging to find.
Yeah, I did contribute a bit for St Hugh's with that one. And also just to add, all the colleges have the same level of teaching as well. None of them are kind of better at it than others. They all have massively high level tutors. So the teaching across all of them is exactly the same.
Yeah. Let's go back to the questions. We've been asked, what if you're applying for a subject that doesn't require a test, is the personal statement more important? For example, chemistry and biochemistry at Oxford, there is no test. So, Rohan, what to do if there isn't a test? Because this is an interesting outlier, that there are these couple of subjects at Oxford that still don't have a test.
Yeah, so the key thing here is that most students will end up getting an interview for things like chemistry and biochemistry. So Oxford normally only interviews about 30%, 40% of students, but I think, Matt, you'll probably have a better idea, but I think for chemistry, it's almost as high as 85%.
It's a big number. If you give me 2 seconds, I'll be able to get it exactly.
So essentially what they're looking for is, so they do screen, they'll screen based on GCSEs, and to a certain extent the personal statement, most of it's based on GCSEs and eligibility, which is why most people will end up with kind of an interview. And so the interview becomes the only thing that they use to shortlist, to give out offers instead. So yes, that's where the infamous pie chart does fail, but those are the few small exceptions to it.
93.6 is the number I've been able to find on my big spreadsheet. Now, one of the reason for this is perhaps a little unexpected, which is that if you have an admissions test for every subject, you never find out if the admissions tests work. So the reason there's no test for chemistry is to find out if the tests are helpful, and to see by having a control group of other scientists to check whether the tests add anything to the admissions process. Whether this will change at some point when they'll have definitively decided that tests are good, I don't know. But that is my understanding at the moment, that it's
well, it used to be the TSA for chemistry, didn't it? And then they got rid of it.
It's for good RCT reasons. So they're doing proper admirable science there, even in the admissions process.
Not that it matters to an individual applicant. So essentially, if you're applying for chemistry, biochemistry, just rest assured, if you're an eligible applicant, you will get an interview. If you get an interview, please don't celebrate, because you've not really passed any significant hurdles, but prepare like you're going to get an interview, and prepare thoroughly. This
is a mistake a lot of students we speak to make, which is that they will wait until the day they get the interview invitation to start preparing for the interview. And this year particularly, this has been very dangerous, as the online nature of the interviews means that there's been much less pressure than there would normally be to let people know in advance. And as you can imagine, if you discover you have an interview 3 days before the interview, it is too late to be ready.
Yeah, I was actually speaking to one student, and he literally got 72 hours notice. So there's very little you can do at that point, apart from just try and cram, but it just doesn't work at that point. Interviews are a soft skill, and take months and months of prep to actually start seeing improvements in.
Yeah. Lai asks us about the enrichment seminars. Do you have to go to all of them? Do we force you? Even if you're not particularly interested in the subject, in the topic that week. Rohan, you go to the enrichment seminars every now and again, even though you don't have to. No one forces you.
No one forces me. Short answer is we expect you to go to at least 1 in 2 to 1 in 3. The topics will naturally be, some topics will naturally be more interesting to you than others. We also assume that once COVID is over, you will have a life of some variety, and we don't expect you to give up every Sunday afternoon. What we do ask is, if for the topics you are interested in, you work diligently, complete the homework set in advance, and then any prep work that results from them as well. But no, we don't expect you to go to every seminar. That would be a serious amount of time.
The other thing to take into account here is that as your life proceeds, you will be forced to do all sorts of things you don't find particularly interesting at first. And it is often a good idea to go along and participate with a certain amount of enthusiasm, because you may end up changing your mind. I'm sure, Rhiannon, you can probably speak to this best. Probably there are bits of maths that you didn't think were interesting, and then it turned out they were.
Yes, well, there's like groups and lots of pure maths and things I thought I was going to hate, and you get there and you realize how much it can actually apply to other things, or things that you think pure maths is kind of, that's the really high key stuff about kind of infinite dimensions and that sort of thing, but you can apply that. So I'm currently doing that with how that applies to how viruses are shaped in my masters, and I was quite bored by it in first year, but had to learn it in the end, and it's turned out to be really useful into something I'm interested in now.
Yeah, this is something to bear in mind, both the enrichment seminars and for the university experience, which is that you might not think you're interested in something, but more often than not, when it's being taught to you by an expert who is really passionate about it, that tends to fix the problem, and it does turn out to be interesting after all. Reshma asks, where do our tutors come from? Are they all from Oxbridge? Now, I don't know if they are all 100% from Oxbridge. I presume it's not 100%, but it's pretty close, Rohan, right? I mean, we have a little bit more flexibility around the medicine tutors that we work with.
Yeah, so pretty much every person who'd be tutoring an Oxbridge applicant would be from Oxbridge. The only real exceptions to that is exactly what you just said, Mal, which is some law schools, when we work with students who are applying for Glasgow, Edinburgh, will then pair them with a tutor from Glasgow, Edinburgh, and same for medics. So we have a lot of medics who apply for, say, LSC. Things to make. We have a lot of medics who apply for London medical schools like King's, Barts, Imperial, in which case we effectively university match. But yes, if you apply and your students applying for, say, engineering at Oxford, we would then pair them with an engineering tutor from Oxford, if they're applying for maths at Cambridge, they would get a Cambridge maths tutor, and so on and so on.
Yeah, there you go. So pretty close. Obviously, if we have a student who hasn't been to Oxford but instead has been to Harvard, we don't kick them out on that basis. Although to come to think of it, the one student I can think of who we have who did go to Harvard has now gone to Oxford, so she solved that problem for us. Amelia asks, for Oxford engineering, how can a student make a link between playing music to a high standard and engineering in a personal statement? Now, this is a great example of how to use your extracurricular activities to actually support your application. Rohan, I presume you're a grade 8 pianist.
How dare you? Yeah, I am. Yeah, so we had this, you have to be really careful the way you do this, because the kind of, I've read so many personal statements which say, I play piano really well, therefore I'm very manually dexterous, therefore I'll be an excellent surgeon, and that fallacy is quite a tenuous one. So whatever you do, please don't kind of make large sweeping assumptions, kind of build upon it. So something like, I enjoy music, it requires a lot of dedication and hard work, and I also enjoy engineering, and this shows my commitment, is a bit better. But I think you have to be very careful of kind of making some very tenuous links to it. That can come across as quite disingenuous and forced otherwise.
Yeah, in the context of engineering in particular, if you have, if you can show that your interest in, I don't know, the bassoon has led you onto an interesting research project about the nature of air pressure, then that could be a really useful way of bringing it into your personal statement. But again, yeah, you don't want to be drawing a slightly laboured link between your skill as a violinist and your skill as a pharmacist. It's probably not going to work, and it's going to make you look a little bit silly. Kirsty asks, if you attend a private college or school, can it hurt your chance of being accepted into Oxbridge? Now, this is one of those interesting questions that we get quite regularly, because you get it from both sides. We get a lot of students from private schools worried that it's going to hurt, and a lot of people who don't go to private schools who are worried that that's going to hurt. Rohan, what's the latest on this from your understanding?
Population-wise, I think about 60 to 70% of the Oxbridge cohort are made up of private school applicants state school applicants, versus about 30% for private schools. Now, the success rates obviously differ. So if you go to a private school, generally private schools will provide their students with more support than other schools. Again, depends on the school itself, but generally private schools will do a better job, in which case private school students naturally end up getting in more. On a population basis, that makes a huge difference. On an individual applicant, and this is what I say to students, is please don't worry. And especially please don't worry about changing schools. We sometimes have parents saying to us, should we change schools to a private or state school after year 11? It makes marginal difference realistically. If you think of, for instance, even if you're, let's say, 20% more likely to get in, 20% spread across thousands of applicants means effectively it's less than a few percentile on an individual applicant. And you can more than offset that by just working harder. So yes, your chances may be slightly higher or lower if you go to a private or a state school, but realistically, it's more about the individual applicant than the kind of school itself. Yeah,
when it comes to changing school, it's also a very high risk strategy, as there is always the chance that you just won't like the school, and that the disruption to your happiness, to your education, will end up cancelling out any notional advantage or disadvantage that you've managed to get hold of. Generally speaking, if you're getting the grades, you want to be focusing on the real tangible things rather than worrying about which school you've been to. If you're a good applicant, if they like you, you do well in the tests, you do well in the interview, you're going to get in regardless of whether you've been to Eton or whether you've been to, I don't know, whatever a bad school in the UK is. Obviously, it's easier to name the good ones than the bad ones. I wouldn't want to be rude about anyone's school. Ashlyn asks, for the 2022 intake, students will have centre-assessed GCSE grades. What weight will Cambridge and Oxford place on GCSEs, and will that be changed by the centre-assessed thing? So I guess the first thing to say is if everyone has centre-assessed grades, In a sense, no one does. If it affects everyone, then it's not going to affect anyone, is the first thing to say. So it isn't worth worrying too much about whether it's going to be a disadvantage from a competitive perspective. The other thing to say is that centre assessed grades are something that Oxford and Cambridge were right at the front of pushing for back in August. I believe Oxford was the first university to say that they would take everyone who got the, regardless of whether they met the grades through the algorithm or not. Cambridge went on to do similarly, and that's led to a larger than usual cohort this year. Ultimately, Oxford and Cambridge take the views of teachers really seriously, and so I wouldn't think there's going to be any disadvantage from the centre assessed GCSEs. Obviously, if you've done disappointingly, and you then have the chance to do the test to make up the mark, that's a good idea. But at the end of the day, Oxford and Cambridge are going to treat them just as they would normally, because they take them, in fact, more seriously than students expect, is our experience. I mean, this relates a little bit to the school reference, Rohan, if you wanted to speak about that briefly.
Yeah, so lots of students get very worked up about their personal statement and kind of obsess about semicolons versus colons and various things, but actually they almost ignore the school reference. And the school reference, actually, you know, we've got official confirmation from both Oxford and Cambridge that the school reference carries far more weight than the UCAS statement. Yet very few students will actually even ask to see a copy of their school reference. And that there are ways you can politely ask for that to be done, if not at least suggest templates. Now, if your school is used to sending 20 students to Oxford every year, or at least applying, they'll be used to kind of writing hopefully good references. But if you're applying from an academy or a private school which actually has no big pedigree for Oxbridge, then it is helpful kind of giving your teachers some subtle advice as to how to structure their reference to best support you.
Fab, thanks, Rohan. Back in the questions, Samir asks, can you apply for 2 subjects? For example, medical and M physics, which I'm going to guess is medical physics. Is that a subject? So Rohan, can you apply for, I suppose we'll answer first of all, can you apply for more than one subject at Oxford and Cambridge at the same time? And what should you do with your other choices if you're applying for medicine?
Can you apply for 2 subjects? No, simple. What should you do with your 5th choice? If you're applying for medicine, you can only choose 4 medical schools. 5th choice, it's really up to you. Most of the time, we just recommend that you leave a blank, and then if you've not had any offers by December, you can choose a 5th choice in a related field, pharmacy, biomed, that kind of thing. And often what will happen is if you do miss your medical offer, some universities will still give you a place in a standard science degree instead. But the 5th choice is really, we can talk about that in more detail with you, but there's really not that much finesse or cleverness required with it. Yeah,
I say it's probably an excellent idea to go off and become a pharmacist. I was reading the other day that they have the best work-life balance of anyone in the medical field. Very appealing, I imagine, for doctors at the moment, the chance to get to go home at a normal time. We've had a couple of questions about work experience and projects from Mia and from Maggie. Did you want to take any, you talked a little bit about lectures and things, Rhiannon. Did you do any projects to prepare for your application, or do you know anyone who did?
So I didn't do any projects, but I know people who did on my course. So with maths, quite a few of them went and coded their own thing in their spare time, which is quite a good thing to do. I think, so someone said about if it's better to read a book or learn medical knowledge. They don't want you to kind of just learn and memorize things kind of in your own time, because that's not really expressing an interest as such. They want you to actually be interested in the subject and going and looking out for things that you can find and learn about, or expressing this interest in some way. So a project is a really good way to do that. Obviously with maths, computer science, coding a thing is quite good. You could probably do that for kind of chemistry or biology. You can go and look at some nature and things. But an independent project is showing that you in your own time have gone and done this thing when you could have just been playing FIFA or watching TV. So that's a good thing to do. Wider reading, again, it's kind of equal, to be honest, with doing a project and wider reading. It's just you saying that in your own time you've gone out and done your subject. With work experience, I think this year especially, they're not, because it's hard to get work experience. Often it only happens if you know kind of someone who's in it already, and so they're a bit worried then about kind of it's only the people whose parents are high up in something that can then give them work experience in something. So I don't think they put loads of weighting on work experience compared to other things, especially in a pandemic year when it's hard to go out and do any kind of work experience. But so I wouldn't just memorize kind of information. It would be going and finding a YouTube video on this thing that you're interested in that then takes you to this book that you read because you're interested in this area to then find out more about that part of it. It's kind of more of a journey than just memorizing things like you would for school.
Fab, thanks. Andy asks, is there any particular reason why certain boarding schools have higher Oxford admissions rates? Rohan, do we have anything further to add on private schools? I suppose the obvious answer is I guess some of them are better, better at preparing students than others. I don't know if there's something particular about being there overnight that helps.
Well, I think it depends on also boarding schools. Obviously, you're there for a greater period of time. You're kind of more immersed in it. The day may be longer. It depends on the school. Not all boarding schools are better at getting students in. And for instance, if you look at college, private schools like Perth, for instance, in Cambridge, they get an enormous amount of students in, and that's just a day school. So just because it's a boarding school doesn't mean it's a particularly good school. I suppose you're probably referring to places like Harrow, Winchester, Eton, who do get quite a few students in every year. It tends to be because they prepare their applicants well, and again, they don't treat it as a kind of a here you go, here's a one-day course on the maths or the ENGA. They have preparation and lessons that are embedded into their timetable right from the start. And actually, that's kind of what we try and simulate and emulate at UniAdmissions, admittedly at a much higher level and probably arguably more intensively as well. But that allows students who are keen and committed to who are working with us to actually have that similar level of preparation and do it in their own time.
Fab, thank you. KJ asks, what is the stance from Cambridge, the example he comes up with, about retaking GCSEs to get to make a more competitive application? So should you retake your GCSEs, Rohan?
It depends again on what the GCSEs are and what was the reason and rationale. If it was just bad effort, then no, it's probably not worth retaking them. If there was family extenuating circumstances, then again, it's best to speak to the individual college that you're considering applying to. But in general, it's not worth retaking your GCSEs. It's much better just to do very, very well on the BEMA. Now, if your GCSEs you didn't get any A's at all, then I think at that point you need to speak to the university and see if you'll consider. Most Oxbridge colleges won't consider retakes for GCSE level.
I can offer some experience, and that so I had all A's and A stars, except I got a B in English language, so I ended up retaking it just so that I could have all A's and A stars. And I don't know how it would. I got in with it, and it was fine for me to just put in. The B had never actually made it onto my application form for Oxford, but I know they do look at your kind of GCSEs contextually from kind of what school you went to. So if you went to kind of a poorer state school, then they don't mind so much about if you've got some worse grades, because that's just sometimes bad for you too.
Exactly. If you're getting all A stars, but you're one of 5 or 6 students at your school who's doing that, that's one thing. But if you've got 5 A's and 5 B's, but that's the best anyone's done in your school since 1996, that's going to be seen as much more of an achievement, quite rightly. Marina asks, how do Oxford view the extended project qualification, the EPQ? Did you do an EPQ round? I didn't. I don't know if they've been invented yet.
I didn't know. My college tried to make me do one because I was applying to Oxbridge, but I couldn't see a way of doing one that was appropriate to maths, and it was never mentioned that they were interested in one on the math part of the website. So I didn't do one because I didn't think there was any kind of need for me to. But I think in the other sciences, you maybe could do it in that area.
Yeah. Now, my understanding, Rohan, is you don't get specific extra points for the EPQ on the application form, right?
No.
No. So yeah, the EPQ is a really good thing to do in terms of expanding your horizons and practicing university level work. But you're not going to get a bonus point for it on the application for having done it. So it's really most useful as something you can bring into your personal statement to demonstrate your commitment and your enthusiasm, just like the lectures or the videos or anything else in terms of the kind of super curricular. So it's not mandatory by any means, and if you'd rather use that time some other way, then you can, like Rhiannon, manage to get the school to let you off. Amtan asks, if an international student took their A-levels in the UK, will they still be treated as an international student when trying to enter university? Now, this is a complicated question, I believe. Rohan, can you, are you aware of what the latest on this is? Because I know that the rules have changed about this in the last, well, in the last 24 days.
Well, I can go by what they used to be, which is 25 days ago, Matt, which is if you've been ordinarily resident in the UK for more than, I think it's 5 years, you have right to remain indefinitely in the UK, and then you're classified as a home student. The only exception to that is if you're resident in the UK for the purposes of education. Now, from the limited information we have from the question, it sounds like you've been in a boarding school or living in the UK purely for A-levels, in which case it's likely that you would be classified as an international. In that case, the best thing to do is to contact either Student Finance or the university directly, but I suspect you'd count for as an international applicant, which obviously is a bit frustrating because you end up paying a much, much higher set of fees and having to compete with the whole world instead of just British applicants.
Yeah, thanks, Rohan. Maria asks about our experience working with students who are educated at home. Of course, everyone's educated at home these days, but people who've made it a choice rather than had it imposed upon them.
Yeah, we worked with a handful. There are a few things we need to kind of make sure that they've kind of covered bases. So some students just tend to, we've had to turn away a few students who haven't taken the standard examinations. They've not taken GCSEs, for instance, or sometimes they've taken them very, very early, done not great at them. You know, they've got like B's and C's, but they took them when they were, say, 12. So it just requires us to kind of go through things in a lot more detail. But yes, we have worked with students.
Fab. All right. I'm going to have to let Rhiannon go in a moment, so please do send in any questions that I won't be able to answer. Before that happens, drop those into the Q&A. But otherwise, I suppose we may even end up finishing relatively early. It's been relatively low on questions today. I must have done good slides, which is a worry because the Q&A is actually the bit I think that's good. And maybe I'll just have to do a PowerPoint next time. That'll be easier. I mean, Rohan wouldn't have to come. It'll be a relief to you. You'd get your weekends back. So Rhiannon, just before you go, is there anything that you were expecting us to ask that you haven't been asked and that you'd like to answer despite the question not having come up?
So I don't know if it's exactly with the application process. I just think starting earlier rather than later. I mean, now it's very early to be starting, but just it helps you overall. Because if you start now, just for your personal statement, kind of, writing down, I might read this book, I've been to this lecture, I like this bit. My personal statement started out as a set of bullet points that I've written at kind of the beginning of the summer, and then just kind of every week I'd come back to it, kind of maybe flesh it out into slightly proper sentences, then turn that into paragraphs. And then it had kind of fallen out by early September, and that meant that I wasn't kind of panicking, staying up late trying to do it. The same kind of also applies for the admissions tests. So they're kind of early November. And I would say the best method of preparation isn't kind of cramming it all 2 weeks beforehand. It's kind of every week, maybe starting in September. if you just do kind of one past paper, go through the answers, that's maybe one afternoon a week, really isn't that much. And by then you've done 8 or 9 past papers, which really sets you up. Obviously, some of them don't have past papers, but that just really sets you up for kind of knowing what it's about, having enough time to ask any questions. And it just means you're really in the swing of it and you're not rushing at the end and you're quite relaxed before it all starts.
Rohan, I know you're also a fan of preparing ahead. You may even want to prepare further ahead than Rhiannon.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started, I actually pretty much started in almost the end of year 11. I kind of actually wish I'd started a little bit earlier. It really depends on kind of how much support you're getting from your peers and how kind of prepped you are. So back when I applied, the BMAT didn't exist. Well, there were no BMAT papers, and the BMAT was first being introduced, so I was a bit of a nerd and had to create my own past papers, for instance. So it really is kind of how much effort you're willing to put in. But you know, in my case, it obviously worked out very well. The key thing is we do work with some students who start very late, so kind of July onwards, and some of them do succeed. But as Rhiannon said, the earlier you start, the better success rates we see. So with some students we work with from almost year 10, and we see some amazing results with them. And so it really depends on kind of what what you're looking for. Especially now with so much time available in people's hands, there's just no excuse for not really able to be putting in for several hours a week on their application. And even if it doesn't work out, you change your mind, at least you've gained a lot of skills and knowledge that you can apply in your career, whatever you choose to do and go on to.
Yeah, this is really helpful when thinking about choosing a subject we discussed earlier on. If you're not sure if you want to be a chemist or a biologist or a physicist, starting your application early is a really good way to make sure that you've picked the right subject. You don't want to be in a position where you discover that actually you don't want to study history just after you've submitted your personal statement to study history. And if you start earlier, you're much more likely to catch that rather than find yourself regretting your choice once it's too late. So I'm going to let Rhiannon go now. Rhiannon, please, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Rhiannon.
Have a lovely weekend, and I'll speak to you via email after this. But yeah, have a lovely weekend. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye.
Just the two of us now, Matt.
It is. It's just like the old days. So we've got a few more questions that I'm going to go through, and then we'll try and escape at 1:30, so that we're right on time for the hour and a half, which is in my diary. The Owls ask, is there a test for engineering? Yes. At Oxford, it is the physics test, the PAT, and at Cambridge, it is the ENGAR, the engineering test. We have a lot of support available for both of these, including an enormous book about the ENGAR that Rohan and I collaborated on last year. So we can definitely help you prepare for those tests, and those are also part of the prep portal. So if you want to practice engineering questions, there's an awful lot of them on there, if that's what you're interested in doing. Sorry, I've just broken the GIF. Let's see if I can fix that. There we go. Maria asks us about deferred applications. So this is something we're going to be talking about next week when we discuss reapplying, as deferrals are sort of related to this question of having two bites at the apple. Is it a good idea to apply deferred if you don't need to? Is it a good idea to apply twice? What's your advice at the moment, Rohan?
Normally when you put a deferred application in, you have to state very clearly it's deferred. So in that case, you'd only have one chance. So realistically, what you should do is you should apply, and then once you've accepted the offer, you could then contact the university. But yeah, my general advice is apply as many times as you have the time available to. Because even if you don't get in the first time, the second time, you're going to be preparing and applying with a whole host of life experiences, and so you can say, well, my test didn't go particularly well last time, let me do that again better. So students who join in our Head Start program, i.e. the ones starting with us in year 10 and 11, we actually make them sit the UCAD, the BML, their corresponding admissions test a year early. That's actually fantastic because they get a better understanding of how they're going to do with almost no prep, and often it's quite a wake-up call, because they realize, goodness, there's actually a lot of very smart people out there, especially if you go to a small school or an international school where perhaps not many people are applying or working at the caliber of an Oxford applicant. And that is a huge motivating factor. So I'm sure the same was true with you, Matt, that the kind of highest achievers are kind of almost motivated by a fear of failure. And we see that with some of the students we work with, is they just don't want to fail. And that fear of kind of doing badly in the test can actually be a huge influence in them performing really, really well the second time around. So yes, my advice is generally to apply as many times as you can and have the desire to do so.
Yeah, thanks. I'm flattered to be described as high achieving. That doesn't normally come up. But yeah, again, I think, Maria, the circumstances of you and your daughter seem to be very specific. So it's definitely worth getting in touch with us directly so that we can kind of tease those out. As what you'll need to do and what will be best will be, I think, highly specific to your circumstances. But we're more than happy to support you as best we can, whether you end up working with us in the long run, whether it ends up being Cambridge or not. We're more than happy to speak to you and answer some questions there. Now, I believe we've run out of questions. So if anyone would like to squeeze one in quickly now, please do it before we escape, and your opportunity to ask questions vanishes for another week.
One of the other questions we normally get is there a recording? So yes, the recording will be made available in a few days' time on YouTube. So you can just wait out for that. We'll send you an email with the details in case you've missed something. If you'd like to kind of get more details, please do book in a consultation. We are, surprisingly, can't actually remember the last time in January we were so busy, Matt, but it is incredibly busy right now. So we are working through a backlog. We will get to you as soon as possible. If you'd like kind of more direct approach, you can just call us, and the numbers listed at the top of the website.
Yeah. Okay, fab. So we've got two final questions that we'll go through, and then we will three, and then we'll escape. Samir and Marina both ask how do you choose between Oxford and Cambridge? You can only apply to one or the other. The reason you can only apply to one or the other is fairly straightforward, which is that if you're allowed to apply to both, almost everyone would apply to both. And this would mean that each university would be dealing with almost double the number of applications. And some people would get into both, which would make it much harder to work out who to give the offers to, because there'd be a much greater chance than there currently is that people would decide not to go. So the rule is you can only apply to one, and you can only apply to one course at one university. It's basically so to make sure that the system is fairer, and also so that the universities can actually run the admissions process. Oxford will get, I'll have to double check a figure, but over, it'll be absolutely thousands of applications each year, and it would be simply impractical to deal with twice that number. Yeah, here we are. The number I have for 2019 is 23,000 applications. Now, if you imagine that suddenly ballooned to 40,000 applications, you can see how that would be rather difficult to administrate when they have other important things to do, like developing a vaccine or whatever. When it comes to choosing between the two, well, both Rohan and I went to Cambridge, so we're very biased in that respect. But we generally recommend that you focus on choosing a course rather than choosing a university. The reason being that Oxford and Cambridge, they are actually pretty damn similar. They're roughly the same distance from London. The experience you'll get there is pretty similar between the two. What you want to be doing is picking the course that's right for you, rather than going, I want to go to Oxford, what will I study? I mean, why did you choose Cambridge over Oxford, Rohan? What's your story there?
So I think I wanted a university with more medical applicants. The Cambridge Medical School was a bit bigger. I wanted to, it's going to sound morbid, but I wanted to dissect people, whereas Oxford only did pro sections. So essentially I wanted a kind of more hands-on medical experience. Cambridge was a little bit smaller, which is a bit nicer. I also thought I'd have a better chance at Cambridge because I didn't have perfect grades. I had 1A in French, annoyingly. So I thought rather than risking it at Oxford, I thought Cambridge would be a better fit on that. So there was a bit of strategy, but also a lot of kind of course research involved.
Yeah, and as we mentioned earlier with the colleges, you meet very few people who went to Oxford but wish they'd gone to Cambridge instead. So the important thing is to pick the course that's right for you, because once you're there, chances are you'll be very much of the opinion that the other one is rubbish fairly quickly. And we'll have two final questions. One is a nice light one to finish with. The Owls ask, what does the consultation entail and how long is it? Rohan, tell us about the consultation. Because I work here, I have never done a consultation as a customer because I don't need to. I'm too old to go to university anyway.
Yeah, maybe one day, Matt. We'll drag you to the dark side. Yeah, so an individual consultation, essentially what we do is we speak to the student and the parents. We make sure the student's qualified, and we assess the student's application. That's typically finding about their GCSEs, their school background, how much application and how much work have they done on their application process so far. And then we make a recommendation as to whether we can work with you or not. We can also make a recommendation as to things like work experience, books to read, any courses or seminars to be attending. It's also a chance for you to ask any more specific questions like, should I take a 4th A level, those kind of, or should I do an EPQ, that kind of thing. Normally takes about, depending on the student, how quickly they kind of respond and how involved the parents are, anywhere from about 15 minutes to 40 minutes. So it really depends on kind of the kind of exact circumstances, but it's really an informal conversation to find out a little bit more about you. It's not really a formal assessment where we kind of grill them, the student, with lots of tests and interview style questions. That comes much later in the program.
Yeah, and as they've added, for students who haven't done their GCSEs yet, obviously we won't ask how they've gone. We don't expect you to be able to predict the future. But if you're coming to these things, if your child is interested, then we work with students who haven't done their GCSEs yet all of the time. And so that can be, you know, there are various ways of assessing student fit, which I'm not an expert in, so I'm sure we'll be able to figure something out there. And finally, they've also asked, do you still practice medicine, Rohan? I thought you'd got the hang of it by now. Don't need more practice, do you?
Well, yeah, I did it for several years, and I think I could do it on my sleep at one point. I practice medicine vicariously through my parents and my partner right now, and I also help a lot of medical applicants. I think I'm doing my bit. I have been saying to the team that actually if things get particularly much worse, then I probably would go back and helping out. But actually things seem to be slowly subsiding now. So far so good on my side.
Yeah, I say it's a good backup career to have. If I didn't have this job, I'm not sure what I would do, and it certainly wouldn't be anything as well paid as going back into being a doctor. But that sort of brings us to the end here. The good news this week is we have a big increase in the number of people who know about the vaccine. Last week, just about half of our attendees either had the vaccine themselves or knew who had. Today, 53% of people know more than one person who's had it. One person knew more than 5 people, and someone else knew more than 10 people who had had the vaccine. No one had had it themselves yet, though. But that's a pleasing growth from last week. So the numbers that I've been seeing in the news do appear to be accurate, and the vaccine it's funny, isn't it? It's one of those things that felt like it was never going to happen, and now it's happened all at once, sort of like bankruptcy.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose. Well, I mean, I read it was about 9%, so that's it's a nominal achievement as to what the NHS can do when it really puts its mind to it. It's just unbelievable. That speed is just unthinkable, really.
Yes, it's I haven't seen it put anywhere, but it is very pleasing to see that the number of vaccinations is now 7 or 8 or maybe even 10 times the number of infections. So I think it's trending in the right direction.
So I think I heard every 30 seconds there are 300 vaccines that are going to people's arms, which is just miraculous, really. So
I've actually
Bojo for that one.
Yes, I've actually got a bottle of champagne in the fridge for when my wife and I go and get ours. It's something we're very much looking forward to. But that brings us to the end of this week's session. Next week, we will be talking about reapplying to Oxford and Cambridge. So if you are awaiting on your results, hopefully you'll get in. But if you're not so fortunate, please come and join us next week to discuss how to take a second bite at the apple. And then we will be going through, I think we have a law session the following week. And then I think we're fairly close to coming back round to medicine again, as we kind of go through a rotation of subjects in these. But as I say, that brings us to the end of this week. If you'd like to say goodbye, Rohan.
Goodbye, Rohan.
Goodbye from me as well. Have a lovely weekend, everyone, and hopefully see some of you next week.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.